The black man who was stopped by security guards and nearly escorted out of a building for looking suspicious was actually walking into a property he had just purchased for $47 million? What if I told you that the same lobby where security questioned his right to exist was about to become the headquarters of his multi-billion-dollar real estate empire? And what if I told you that the security guards who treated him like a trespasser would soon be taking orders from the man they tried to remove? This is the story of Brandon Ellis, and it's about to shatter every assumption you have about appearances, assumptions, and who gets to own the keys to power in America. Brandon wasn't lost. He wasn't confused about where he belonged. He wasn't trying to sneak into somewhere he didn't have permission to be. He was a Harvard MBA, a former Goldman Sachs analyst, and the founder of one of the fastest-growing real estate investment firms in the country. But in that marble lobby on a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he was a black man in an expensive suit walking with confidence through a space where his presence was immediately questioned. They saw a threat. The city was about to meet a titan. By the end of this video, you'll understand why sometimes the people who question your right to enter a building are the exact people who need to learn that you might just own the deed. Because Brandon Ellis's story proves that when people can't see your value, sometimes you have to buy the entire building and put your name on it in letters so big that the whole world has to acknowledge who you really are. This is another story from Touching Boss Stories channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. It encourages us to serve you with the best of stories. It was 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Brandon Ellis walked through the revolving doors of One Financial Plaza, a gleaming 40-story skyscraper in the heart of Chicago's business district. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, carrying a leather briefcase that had been a graduation gift from his mother when he earned his MBA from Harvard Business School. His appearance was immaculate, his demeanor confident, his purpose clear. Brandon was there for a meeting that would change his life, and the life of everyone who worked in that building. But before he could reach the elevator bank that would take him to the 24th floor, his progress was halted by two security guards who had been watching him since the moment he entered the lobby. "Excuse me, sir," called out the first guard, a middle-aged white man whose tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This entrance is for staff and clients only." Brandon paused, turning to face the guards with the measured patience of someone who had unfortunately become accustomed to these interactions. "I have a meeting on the 24th floor," he replied calmly, his voice carrying the crisp diction that came from years of Ivy League education and Wall Street training. The second guard, younger but equally presumptuous, stepped closer with an expression that mixed suspicion with condescension. "We'll need to see some ID. You can't just walk in off the street." The assumption embedded in that statement was as clear as it was insulting. These guards had looked at Brandon Ellis, a man whose net worth exceeded the annual budget of most small cities, and decided that he was someone who had wandered off the street rather than someone who belonged in their gleaming corporate tower. Brandon reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate slowness, aware that sudden movements might escalate an already ridiculous situation. But instead of producing identification, he offered advice that would have saved everyone considerable embarrassment if it had been heeded. "Before you make a bigger mistake," Brandon said, his voice remaining steady despite the rage building beneath his professional exterior, "I suggest you check with your manager." The first guard's response revealed just how deeply he had misread the situation. Instead of recognizing the warning in Brandon's words, he interpreted them as defiance. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside while we verify your appointment. We can't have unauthorized individuals wandering around the building." The phrase, "unauthorized individuals," hung in the air like a slap. Brandon Ellis had been authorized to enter buildings like this since he was 22 years old and landed his first job as an analyst at Goldman Sachs. He had been authorized to manage billion-dollar portfolios, structure complex financial deals, and advise Fortune 500 CEOs on their most critical business decisions. But in this lobby, his authorization was being questioned because his skin color didn't match the security guards' assumptions about who belonged in their building. The situation escalated when the younger guard placed his hand on Brandon's shoulder, a gesture that crossed the line from discriminatory questioning into physical intimidation. "Let's make this easy," the guard said. "Just step outside and we'll sort this out." The physical contact was a mistake that would haunt that security guard for the rest of his career. Brandon Ellis had spent 15 years in high-stakes business environments where respect was earned through competence and lost through weakness. He had never allowed anyone to diminish his dignity, and he wasn't about to start in a lobby filled with onlookers who were already forming their own assumptions about what they were witnessing. "Remove your hand," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a tone that carried unmistakable authority. "Now." The guard's hand dropped immediately, but the damage was done. The entire lobby had witnessed a successful black businessman being treated like a criminal simply for existing in a space where his presence was deemed suspicious. Other people entering the building, all of them white, had walked past the same security guards without being questioned or challenged. Brandon's treatment was clearly based on one factor alone. As the tension in the lobby reached its peak, Brandon made a decision that would transform this moment of humiliation into the catalyst for his greatest professional triumph. Instead of arguing further with security guards who were too ignorant to recognize their error, he would let the situation play out. Because Brandon Ellis knew something that nobody else in that lobby could have imagined. He wasn't there as a visitor or client seeking access to someone else's building. He was there as the new owner. But to understand how Brandon had reached this moment of ultimate vindication, we need to go back to where his journey began, in the same building where he was now being questioned 15 years earlier, when he was a young analyst who had learned his first painful lessons about how assumptions and prejudice could shape a career. Brandon Ellis had started his professional life at Whitman & Associates, a prestigious investment firm that occupied floors 18 through 22 of One Financial Plaza. Fresh out of Harvard Business School with stellar grades and glowing recommendations, Brandon had been recruited into Whitman's analyst program with the expectation that he would rapidly advance through the ranks of the firm. From his first day at Whitman, Brandon distinguished himself through his analytical brilliance, his innovative thinking, and his ability to identify profitable investment opportunities that his colleagues missed. His financial models were more sophisticated than those of analysts with years more experience. His client presentations were more compelling than those of senior associates. His deal structures were more creative than those of vice presidents. But excellence without advocacy is often invisible in corporate environments where success depends as much on perception as performance. Brandon's ideas were consistently praised in meetings, then implemented under the leadership of senior colleagues who received credit for his insights. His analytical work was featured in client presentations, but his name appeared in footnotes rather than headlines. His strategic recommendations generated millions of dollars in profits for Whitman & Associates, but the bonuses and promotions went to the relationship managers who presented his work to clients. The pattern was so consistent that Brandon began to document every instance of having his contributions marginalized or appropriated. The documentation wasn't for legal purposes, it was for his own sanity, to confirm that he wasn't imagining the systematic way his value was being extracted while his advancement was delayed. The breaking point came during Brandon's third year at Whitman, when he developed an investment strategy that would become the foundation for his future empire. Brandon had identified a trend in urban real estate markets where gentrification was creating opportunities for strategic property acquisition and development. His analysis showed that specific neighborhoods in major cities were positioned for dramatic value appreciation due to infrastructure improvements, demographic shifts, and zoning changes. The investment thesis was sophisticated and contrarian. While most real estate investors were focused on established high-value markets, Brandon had identified emerging neighborhoods where early investment could generate exponential returns as market forces drove rapid appreciation. Brandon spent 6 months developing a comprehensive investment proposal that included market analysis, financial projections, risk assessments, and implementation strategies. The proposal outlined how Whitman & Associates could establish a real estate investment division that would generate hundreds of millions in profits while building a dominant position in urban development markets. When Brandon presented his proposal to the senior partners, the response was swift and dismissive. The managing partner, Jonathan Whitman III, listened to Brandon's presentation with barely concealed condescension before delivering a response that revealed how little he understood about both real estate markets and Brandon's capabilities. "Brandon, this is interesting academic work, but it's not really aligned with our core competencies." We're an investment firm, not a real estate company. Maybe you should consider whether your ambitions are properly matched to your current role. The rejection wasn't just professional, it was personal. Whitman was essentially telling Brandon that his vision was too big for his position, his thinking was too advanced for his level, and his ambitions were inappropriate for someone in his circumstances. But Brandon had learned something crucial during his years of watching other people receive credit for his ideas. He didn't need Whitman and Associates to validate his vision. If they couldn't recognize the value of his strategy, he would implement it himself. The decision to leave Whitman wasn't impulsive, it was strategic. Brandon spent another year at the firm, using his position to build relationships with investors, study market trends, and refine his investment thesis. He saved every dollar of his salary while living in a modest apartment and driving a used car. Most importantly, he used his access to Whitman's resources to complete his education in real estate finance and property development. When Brandon finally submitted his resignation, Jonathan Whitman's response revealed how completely he had misunderstood both Brandon's value and his intentions. "Brandon, I think you're making a mistake. The real estate business is very relationship dependent, and those relationships take decades to build. You might want to reconsider this decision and focus on developing your career within our established structure." Brandon's response was polite but definitive. "Mr. Whitman, I appreciate the advice, but I've learned everything I need to know about building relationships and recognizing opportunities. Now I'm going to apply those lessons on my own terms." 18 months later, Brandon had launched Ellis Capital Management with $2 million in seed funding from investors who recognized what Whitman and Associates had missed. His first real estate acquisition was a small apartment building in a Chicago neighborhood that was beginning to show signs of the gentrification trends he had identified. The building purchase was modest, but the strategy was revolutionary. Instead of simply collecting rent from existing tenants, Brandon renovated the property to attract higher-income residents while implementing programs to help displaced tenants find comparable housing in other neighborhoods. The approach generated strong returns for investors while minimizing the negative social impact that often accompanied gentrification. The success of Brandon's first investment attracted attention from larger investors who were impressed by his ability to generate profits while addressing community concerns. Within 3 years, Ellis Capital Management was managing over $50 million in urban real estate investments across multiple cities. But Brandon's greatest opportunity came when the 2008 financial crisis created distressed real estate markets throughout the country. While other investors retreated from property markets, Brandon recognized that the crisis was creating once-in-a-lifetime acquisition opportunities for investors with capital and vision. Using relationships he had built over 5 years of successful investing, Brandon raised a $200 million distressed asset fund that would acquire undervalued properties in major urban markets. The strategy was ambitious and risky, but Brandon's track record and analytical rigor convinced investors to trust his judgment. The success of the distressed asset fund established Brandon as one of the most sophisticated real estate investors in the country. His ability to identify undervalued properties, structure creative financing arrangements, and implement value creation strategies generated returns that exceeded industry benchmarks by significant margins. By 2018, Ellis Capital Management had grown into a billion-dollar real estate investment firm with properties in 12 major cities. Brandon had become one of the youngest Black real estate moguls in American history, building his empire through the same analytical brilliance and strategic thinking that Whitman and Associates had dismissed as inappropriate for his level. But Brandon's greatest validation was still ahead of him, and it would come in the form of an opportunity to acquire the very building where his journey had begun, the building where he had been ignored, dismissed, and underestimated, and where he was now being questioned by security guards who had no idea they were confronting the man who was about to become their boss. If you've ever been judged, dismissed, or questioned just for existing in a space where people thought you didn't belong, you need to see what Brandon does next. Please subscribe right now because this vindication is going to be absolutely legendary. Have you ever been profiled by security, questioned about your right to be somewhere, or made to feel like you didn't belong in a space? How did it make you feel, and what did you do about it? Share your experience in the comments below. The opportunity to acquire One Financial Plaza came through a phone call that Brandon Ellis had been anticipating for months. The building's previous owner, Consolidated Properties Incorporated, was facing financial difficulties due to over-leveraged investments and declining rental income from traditional office tenants who were downsizing their real estate footprints. Brandon had been monitoring Consolidated Properties' portfolio for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to make an acquisition offer. One Financial Plaza was the crown jewel of their holdings, a prestigious address in downtown Chicago with excellent transportation access, modern infrastructure, and the kind of architectural distinction that attracted premium tenants. But more than its financial potential, One Financial Plaza represented something personal for Brandon. It was the building where he had learned his most important lessons about ambition, discrimination, and the power of perseverance. Acquiring it would be more than a business transaction. It would be a symbolic completion of his transformation from dismissed employee to real estate mogul. The negotiation process was complex and competitive. 3 other real estate investment firms were bidding for the property, including 2 major institutional investors with significantly more capital than Ellis Capital Management. But Brandon had advantages that his competitors couldn't match: detailed knowledge of the building's operations, relationships with key tenants, and a vision for property improvements that would increase both rental income and overall value. Brandon's bid wasn't the highest in terms of initial purchase price, but it was the most sophisticated in terms of deal structure. He proposed a financing arrangement that would provide Consolidated Properties with immediate liquidity while allowing them to retain a minority ownership stake that would benefit from the value appreciation Brandon planned to create. More importantly, Brandon's business plan demonstrated a deep understanding of how the Chicago commercial real estate market was evolving. While other bidders saw One Financial Plaza as a traditional office building that would continue operating according to existing models, Brandon envisioned a mixed-use property that would combine office space with retail, hospitality, and residential components. The vision was innovative and ambitious. Brandon planned to convert several floors into luxury residential units that would attract young professionals who wanted to live within walking distance of their workplaces. The ground floor and second level would be redesigned to include high-end retail stores and restaurants that would serve both building tenants and neighborhood residents. The top floors would be transformed into premium office space with cutting-edge technology and amenities that would command higher rents than traditional corporate environments. Most importantly, Brandon's plan included community development components that would benefit the surrounding neighborhood. He proposed partnerships with local businesses, job training programs for area residents, and affordable housing initiatives that would ensure the building's transformation would create opportunities rather than displacement. The comprehensive nature of Brandon's proposal impressed Consolidated Properties' board of directors, who recognized that his vision would generate more long-term value than simple ownership transfer to institutional investors focused primarily on short-term returns. The final negotiation session took place in the building's executive conference room on the 42nd floor, the same building where Brandon had once worked as an undervalued analyst and where he was now being questioned by security guards in the lobby. The irony of negotiating to purchase a building while being treated as a trespasser in its lobby wasn't lost on Brandon, but he chose to focus on completing the acquisition rather than addressing the discrimination he was experiencing. The purchase price was $47 million, financed through a combination of Ellis Capital Management's own funds, investor equity, and commercial real estate loans. The deal structure was sophisticated enough to minimize Brandon's capital requirements while maximizing his control over the property's future development. When the final signatures were completed and the deed transfer was recorded, Brandon Ellis became the owner of 1.2 million square feet of prime Chicago real estate. At 38 years old, he had acquired one of the city's most prestigious commercial properties using the same analytical skills and strategic thinking that his former employers had dismissed as inappropriate for his level. But the acquisition was just the beginning of Brandon's transformation plan. Over the following 18 months, he would invest an additional $15 million in renovations and improvements that would turn One Financial Plaza into a model for urban mixed-use development. The renovation process began with the residential conversion project. Brandon hired one of Chicago's most prestigious architectural firms to design luxury apartments on floors 35 through 39 that would offer panoramic city views and premium amenities. The residential units were targeted toward young professionals in finance, technology, and creative industries who valued convenience and wanted to live in the heart of the city's business district. The retail component required more complex planning and community engagement. Brandon worked with local business organizations to identify retailers and restaurants that would serve both building tenants and neighborhood residents. Instead of simply leasing space to national chains, Brandon prioritized local entrepreneurs and minority-owned businesses that would contribute to the area's economic diversity. The office space improvements focused on creating flexible, technology-enhanced environments that would attract innovative companies seeking alternatives to traditional corporate environments. Brandon invested in state-of-the-art telecommunications infrastructure, collaborative workspaces, and amenities like fitness centers and meditation rooms that reflected changing expectations about workplace quality. But the most important aspect of Brandon's transformation plan was the community development component. He established partnerships with local job training programs that would provide employment opportunities for area residents during the construction phase and ongoing building operations. He created scholarship programs for students from neighborhood schools who were interested in careers in real estate, finance, or construction. Most significantly, Brandon negotiated agreements with the city that would ensure a percentage of the building's affordable housing units would remain accessible to moderate-income residents even as the surrounding neighborhood experienced development-driven rent increases. The results of Brandon's investment exceeded even his optimistic projections. The residential units were fully leased within 6 months of completion, with waiting lists of potential tenants attracted by the building's unique combination of luxury amenities and urban convenience. The retail spaces generated rental income 30% higher than previous ground floor tenants while creating a vibrant commercial environment that enhanced the entire neighborhood. The office renovations attracted high-quality tenants who were willing to pay premium rents for modern, flexible workspace. Several technology startups relocated their headquarters to One Financial Plaza, drawn by the building's innovative design and Brandon's reputation as a forward-thinking property owner who understood evolving business needs. More importantly, the community development initiatives generated positive social impact that enhanced Brandon's reputation as a responsible real estate investor. Local employment increased by over 200 jobs directly related to building operations and retail tenants. The scholarship programs provided educational opportunities for dozens of students who might not otherwise have access to career development resources. The success of the One Financial Plaza transformation established Brandon as a leader in socially responsible real estate development. Business publications featured his project as a model for urban investment that generated strong financial returns while creating community benefits. City officials praised his approach as an example of how private development could contribute to neighborhood improvement without causing displacement or gentrification-related harm. But for Brandon, the most satisfying aspect of the project wasn't the financial returns or public recognition, it was the personal vindication of owning and transforming the building where his professional journey had begun. Every day that he walked through the lobby where he had once been ignored and dismissed was a reminder of how far vision and perseverance could take someone who refused to accept other people's limitations. The building that had once represented corporate hierarchy and exclusion had become a symbol of innovation, opportunity, and inclusive success. The conference rooms where Brandon's ideas had been stolen were now spaces where he made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and generated millions in revenue. The executive floors where he had been denied advancement were now his personal headquarters where he planned strategies for expanding his real estate empire across multiple cities. 3 years after acquiring One Financial Plaza, Brandon's portfolio had grown to include properties worth over $1.8 billion. Ellis Capital Management employed over 100 people and was recognized as one of the most innovative real estate investment firms in the country. Brandon himself had been featured on the covers of business magazines and invited to speak at major conferences about responsible development and minority entrepreneurship. But the achievement that brought Brandon the most satisfaction came when he received an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School about his journey from financial analyst to real estate mogul. Standing in the same lecture hall where he had learned the theoretical foundations of business strategy, Brandon addressed a new generation of students who would face their own challenges and opportunities in corporate America. Your background, your appearance, your identity, these things will sometimes cause people to underestimate you, Brandon told the assembled students. When that happens, you have two choices. You can spend your energy trying to prove that their assumptions are wrong, or you can use their blindness as a competitive advantage while you build something so undeniable that their opinions become irrelevant. The applause that followed Brandon's remarks came from students who understood that success in business required not just analytical skills and strategic thinking, but also the resilience to overcome systemic barriers and the vision to create opportunities where others saw only obstacles. As Brandon concluded his Harvard presentation and looked out at the diverse group of future business leaders, he thought about the security guards who were, at that very moment, monitoring the lobby of his building in Chicago. They still didn't know that the man they had questioned and attempted to remove was actually their employer. But they were about to learn that lesson in a way they would never forget. Because tomorrow morning, Brandon Ellis would return to One Financial Plaza, not as a visitor seeking access to someone else's building, but as the owner whose name was about to be installed in brass letters above the main entrance, announcing to everyone who entered that this building now belonged to the man they had tried to turn away. This transformation from dismissed employee to building owner is incredible, but the best part is still coming. If you're amazed by Brandon's rise to the top, please subscribe because what happens when those security guards learn the truth is going to be absolutely priceless. What's the biggest assumption someone has made about you that turned out to be completely wrong? Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who end up most shocked by our success. Share your story in the comments below. The morning after Brandon Ellis completed the acquisition of One Financial Plaza, he made a decision that would forever change how discrimination was handled in his building. Instead of immediately announcing his ownership or confronting the security guards who had profiled him, Brandon chose to return to the building and allow the situation to unfold naturally. He wanted to see if his treatment would be different when the guards encountered him a second time. More importantly, he wanted to document the incident to ensure that the systemic problems he had experienced would be addressed comprehensively rather than simply swept under the rug. Brandon arrived at One Financial Plaza at exactly 9:45 a.m., almost the same time as his previous visit. He was dressed in an impeccable charcoal gray suit, carrying the same leather briefcase, and projecting the same quiet confidence that had been misinterpreted as suspicious behavior just 24 hours earlier. As he approached the elevator bank, the same two security guards who had questioned him the day before immediately noticed his presence. The older guard, whose name tag identified him as Robert Chin, stepped forward with the same presumptuous authority he had displayed during their previous encounter. "Sir, didn't we ask you to make appointments through the proper channels?" Chen asked, his tone suggesting that Brandon was a repeat troublemaker rather than a legitimate visitor. The younger guard, Kevin Williams, moved to block Brandon's path to the elevators. "We're going to need to see some identification and verification of your appointment before we can let you proceed." Brandon paused, studying both guards with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this conversation would end. "I told you yesterday that you should check with your manager before making assumptions," he said calmly. "That advice is even more relevant today." Chen's response revealed how little he had learned from the previous day's interaction. "Sir, we don't have time for games. Either you have legitimate business in this building, or you need to leave. It's that simple." What none of them realized was that Richard Harrison, the building's property manager, was rushing toward the lobby in a state of near panic. Harrison had received a call from his assistant informing him that Mr. Ellis, the new owner of the building, was in the lobby being confronted by security guards who apparently had no idea about the ownership transfer that had been completed the previous afternoon. Harrison had been the property manager at One Financial Plaza for 12 years, and he had never experienced a situation quite like this. The building had just been purchased by one of the most successful black real estate investors in the country, and his security team was treating the new owner like a trespasser. As Harrison emerged from the elevator and saw the confrontation unfolding in his lobby, He realized that his career might be in jeopardy if he didn't resolve this situation immediately and appropriately. "Stop!" Harrison called out as he rushed across the marble floor, his voice echoing through the lobby and drawing the attention of everyone present. "Let him go immediately!" Chen and Williams turned toward their manager with confused expressions, clearly uncertain about why their routine security procedures were being interrupted. "That's Mr. Ellis," Harrison announced, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and barely concealed panic. "He's the new owner of this building." The words hung in the air like a thunderbolt. Chen's hand, which had been moving toward Brandon's arm, froze in mid-motion. Williams stepped back as if he had been struck. The other people in the lobby, business professionals, visitors, building employees, stopped their conversations to witness the revelation that was unfolding before their eyes. Brandon Ellis, the man who had been questioned, dismissed, and nearly escorted out of the building, was actually the person who now controlled every aspect of their professional lives. The silence that followed Harrison's announcement was profound and uncomfortable. Chen and Williams looked at each other, then at Brandon, then back at their manager, trying to process the magnitude of their error. Brandon allowed the moment to extend just long enough to ensure that everyone in the lobby understood what had transpired. Then he spoke with the calm authority of someone who held all the power in the situation. "Gentlemen," Brandon said, addressing the security guards directly, "this is exactly why I suggested you check with your manager before making assumptions about who belongs in this building." Harrison stepped forward, visibly sweating despite the building's air conditioning. "Mr. Ellis, I apologize profusely for this misunderstanding. This is completely unacceptable, and I assure you that we will address it immediately." Brandon nodded acknowledgement of Harrison's apology, but his attention remained focused on the security guards who had profiled him. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Williams, I want you to understand something very clearly. Your job is to provide security for this building and safety for its occupants. Your job is not to make assumptions about who belongs here based on their appearance." The lesson was delivered without anger or vindictiveness, but with the unmistakable authority of someone who now determined the employment status of everyone present. "Moving forward," Brandon continued, "security protocols in this building will be based on actual security concerns rather than racial profiling. You will treat every person who enters this lobby with respect and professionalism, regardless of their appearance or your personal assumptions about whether they belong here." Chen attempted to offer an apology, but his words came out as a stammering mixture of excuse-making and damage control. "Mr. Ellis, we were just following standard procedures. We didn't mean any disrespect. We were just doing our jobs." Brandon's response addressed not just the specific incident, but the broader systemic issues that had created it. "Mr. Chen, following standard procedures would mean treating all visitors with courtesy and professionalism. What you did yesterday and today was apply different standards based on racial assumptions. That's not security, that's discrimination." The conversation was being observed by dozens of people in the lobby, including several business executives who were learning for the first time that the building had been purchased by a black real estate mogul whom their security guards had been treating like a criminal. Harrison, recognizing that he needed to demonstrate decisive leadership to save his own job, immediately announced changes that would address the systemic problems Brandon had identified. Effective immediately, all security personnel will undergo comprehensive training on non-discriminatory security procedures, Harrison declared. "We will also implement new protocols that ensure all visitors are treated with equal respect and professionalism." Brandon appreciated Harrison's responsiveness, but he had bigger plans for transforming the building's culture. "Mr. Harrison, I want you to schedule a meeting with all building staff for tomorrow morning. We're going to discuss not just security procedures, but the overall culture and values that will guide operations under new ownership." As the crowd in the lobby began to disperse, Brandon turned his attention to the elevators that would take him to his new executive suite on the building's top floor. But before leaving, he made one final observation that would be remembered by everyone who had witnessed the morning's events. "The next time you see someone who doesn't look like what you expect to see in this building," Brandon said, addressing his comments to Chen and Williams but speaking loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear, "remember that appearances can be deceiving. They might be your next boss." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave Brandon a few moments to reflect on the significance of what had just occurred. In less than 24 hours, he had transformed from a discriminated against visitor to the most powerful person in the building. The security guards who had questioned his right to exist in the lobby now worked for him. The building that had once represented exclusion and hierarchy now belonged to him. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor that would serve as Ellis Capital Management's new headquarters, Brandon was greeted by a team of contractors who were installing signage that would announce the building's new ownership to everyone who entered. The brass letters mounted on the wall spelled out Ellis Holdings, in elegant script that reflected both the dignity and authority of the company that now controlled One Financial Plaza. Below the company name, smaller text would identify Brandon Ellis as chairman and CEO, ensuring that his identity and position would be unmistakable to anyone who visited the executive floor. But more important than the signage was the cultural transformation that Brandon planned to implement throughout the building. Over the following weeks, he would establish new policies and procedures that would ensure no one else would experience the discrimination he had faced in the lobby. The staff meeting that Harrison had promised took place the next morning in the building's main conference room. Brandon addressed an audience that included security guards, maintenance workers, administrative staff, and property management personnel. His message was clear and comprehensive. This building now operates according to principles of respect, professionalism, and equality, Brandon announced. Every person who enters this building, whether they're a tenant, visitor, employee, or service provider, will be treated with dignity and courtesy. There will be no exceptions to this standard, and there will be consequences for anyone who violates it. Brandon went on to announce several initiatives that would reinforce these principles. All security personnel would receive monthly training on non-discriminatory security procedures. Building staff would participate in regular workshops on workplace diversity and inclusion. A new employee handbook would clearly outline expectations for professional behavior and respectful treatment of all building occupants. Most importantly, Brandon established a direct reporting mechanism that would allow anyone who experienced discrimination in the building to bring their concerns directly to management without fear of retaliation. The transformation of One Financial Plaza's culture was immediate and dramatic. Within weeks, building staff were commenting on the improved atmosphere and higher standards of professionalism. Tenants noticed the enhanced level of service and respectful treatment from all building employees. But Brandon's vision for the building extended beyond improved internal culture. He wanted One Financial Plaza to become a model for inclusive business practices that would influence other commercial properties throughout Chicago. The first major initiative was the establishment of a mentorship program that would connect successful business executives who worked in the building with young professionals from underrepresented communities who were seeking career development opportunities. The program would provide networking, skill development, and job placement assistance to participants while creating valuable relationships between mentors and ments. The second initiative involved partnerships with local educational institutions that would provide internship and scholarship opportunities for students interested in careers in real estate, finance, and business management. Brandon personally funded a scholarship program that would support 10 students annually through their undergraduate and graduate education. The third initiative focused on supporting minority-owned businesses by providing affordable office space and business development resources. Brandon designated several floors of the building for startup companies and established a venture capital fund that would provide early-stage funding for promising enterprises led by entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. The impact of these initiatives extended far beyond One Financial Plaza. Other commercial property owners began implementing similar programs after seeing the positive publicity and tenant satisfaction that Brandon's approach generated. Business publications featured his building as an example of how inclusive practices could create both social value and competitive advantage. 6 months after acquiring One Financial Plaza, Brandon received recognition that validated his approach to responsible business leadership. The Chicago Chamber of Commerce presented him with their Excellence in Community Leadership Award, citing his contributions to economic development and social inclusion. But the recognition that meant the most to Brandon came from an unexpected source. Robert Chen, the security guard who had profiled him on that Tuesday morning, requested a private meeting to discuss his experience working under Brandon's leadership. "Mr. Ellis, I want to apologize again for how I treated you when you first came to this building," Chin said during their conversation. "But more than that, I want to thank you for the training and education you've provided. I've learned things about unconscious bias and professional respect that have made me better at my job and better as a person." Chen went on to explain that the diversity training and cultural sensitivity workshops had helped him recognize patterns of discriminatory behavior that he had previously considered normal security procedures. He had become an advocate for inclusive practices among his colleagues and was actively working to ensure that no other visitors would experience the kind of profiling that Brandon had faced. The conversation with Chen represented the kind of transformation that Brandon had hoped to achieve, not just policy changes or procedural improvements, but genuine personal growth and cultural evolution that would create lasting positive impact. Today, Ellis Holdings owns and operates commercial properties worth over $3 billion across 12 major cities. Brandon Ellis is recognized as one of the most influential real estate investors in the country and serves on the boards of several major corporations and nonprofit organizations. One Financial Plaza has become a showcase property that demonstrates how inclusive business practices can generate both financial success and social value. The building maintains 98% occupancy rates while serving as headquarters for numerous minority-owned businesses and innovative startups. The mentorship and scholarship programs that Brandon established have supported over 200 young professionals and students, many of whom have gone on to successful careers in business, real estate, and entrepreneurship. The building's diversity and inclusion initiatives have been replicated by dozens of other commercial properties throughout the country. But perhaps Brandon's greatest achievement is the cultural transformation he created in a building where discrimination was once considered normal security procedure. The lobby where he was profiled and questioned has become a welcoming space where people of all backgrounds are treated with respect and professionalism. The security guards who once tried to remove him now work for an organization that prioritizes equality and inclusion as core values. The building that once represented exclusion and hierarchy has become a symbol of opportunity and advancement for people who might otherwise be overlooked or underestimated. Every morning when Brandon Ellis walks through the lobby of One Financial Plaza, he passes the brass plaque that displays his name and title as the building's owner. But more important than seeing his name on the wall is knowing that no one else will experience the discrimination he faced in that same lobby. The man they tried to remove has become the leader who sets the standards they must follow. The visitor they questioned has become the owner who determines their employment. The person they profiled has become the force that transformed their entire culture. Sometimes the people who question your right to enter a building have no idea that you might just own the deed. Sometimes the individuals who assume you don't belong are about to learn that you're actually the one who decides who gets to stay. Brandon Ellis proved that when people can't see your value, the best response isn't to argue with their blindness. It's to build something so undeniable that they have no choice but to recognize your worth. From profiled visitor to property owner, that's the power of turning discrimination into determination, assumptions into achievements, and other people's limitations into your own liberation. They tried to remove him from the building. He responded by putting his name on the deed and his values in the culture. Now everyone who enters his lobby learns the same lesson those security guards learned. Never judge someone's worth by their appearance, because you might just be looking at your next boss. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't determined by other people's assumptions, if it motivated you to see discrimination as fuel for determination rather than a barrier to success, I need you to take action right now. First, smash that like button to help this message reach everyone who's ever been profiled, questioned, or made to feel like they don't belong somewhere. Second, subscribe to Touching Boss Stories channel and ring that notification bell because I share stories like this regularly. Stories about people who transformed their worst experiences into their greatest triumphs. And third, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the people who doubt them today might be working for them tomorrow. If you could own any building or business where you've been discriminated against or treated poorly, what would it be and how would you transform it? What changes would you make to ensure others never experience what you went through? Drop your vision in the comments below. Your story might inspire the next transformation.